Hi, my name is Dave Farling, the Senior Vice President of Sales here at 3Wire Systems. 3Wire is the leader in eliminating wasteful spend in a federal enterprise through disruptive technologies. And speaking of disruptive technologies, we have one of our key partners here today, Layer7, a CA technologies company. They're here today to talk about API management. And with me from Layer7 is their Vice President of Federal Sales, Jim Rice, and the Layer7 CTO, Mr. Scott Morrison. I'm going to have these two gentlemen explain a bit about their technology and a bit about what that technology can do for you. Scott, Jim, it's all yours.
Hey, thanks a lot, Dave. It's great to be here and great to speak to everybody. This is Scott Morrison. I'm the CTO of Layer7, now Distinguished Engineer at CA Technologies. So if we could advance the slide, we'll get started. So this is an interesting time in technology. And I think it's interesting because what we're seeing is a number of very, very important change agents coming up, not just at different times, but at the same time. This is the time when we're seeing like the rise of mobility happening pretty much at the same time as the rise of cloud. And now we're beginning to see a new force coming in, the whole beginnings of IoT, or the Internet of Things, which gives us the chance to start to put together connections with all of the devices that we rely on a day-to-day basis, some that we don't even know we rely on, and making those available on the internet as well. So it is a really, really exciting time. But as any exciting time happens, there's always going to be problems. And let's jump to the next slide. The biggest issue that people are facing, whether they're a commercial client, whether they're in public sector, it doesn't matter. The biggest issue is always how do you integrate this stuff together? In the end, making all of our systems talk has always been one of the greatest challenges in all of computing. And it turns out that there's no difference now as we begin to bring in cloud, mobility, social networking, and the Internet of Things. Fortunately, there's a new technology also on the horizon that's really promising to bring all of this together. And that's exactly what APIs are. APIs are really a new approach to integrating systems that is based on basically the web. It's based on the proven technology that we use literally every day when we're web browsing all across the world. The very protocols that were built to make a server talk to a web browser, the stuff that goes on without you even having to think about it, those exact same technologies are actually used for computer-to-computer communications or application-to-application communications. Now, it's a simple idea, but it's actually quite profound because it really does let us not just reuse technology, but also reuse expertise. It's been pretty hard won over the last few years. So APIs are the way we're going to do distributed computing. APIs are the way that we're going to tie together our systems in the future and today as well. So next slide, please. The other interesting thing that's coming through APIs is a real shift in how we're delivering IT. Think about your relationship with your phone. You pick up that phone and you just expect it to work. And furthermore, you've probably taken on the whole responsibility for provisioning the apps that matter to you. And yes, you may have a connection with, let's say, a work phone or something, a separate sandbox or something that the work group essentially controls. But you've also probably got your personal space as well. And that personal space is something that you manage and you design, as the owner of the phone. You don't have to go to a central authority and fill out forms in triplicate or anything like that. All of the responsibility for managing the device is really in your hands at this point. And that's an interesting thing because that's exactly where the future of IT management is going. This idea that people can manage their pieces of the whole puzzle as long as you give them the tools to do it effectively. And the beauty of the way phones have sort of shown us the way is that they constrain enough so that people don't get into trouble. They don't run into these issues where all of a sudden they're blocked and they have to spend hours on phone support and that. Generally, it just works. That's the model of modern IT. That's the model of how we're going to do connections between the Internet of Things, between cloud, between mobility, and everything we own. And furthermore, it's also a delegation of important security concepts like identity. It's giving the people who own the identity the ability to begin to tie those identities together. Think about how many passwords you've got. Probably too many if you're like me and pretty much everybody else. But wouldn't it be great if you could start to tie those all together into a unified whole? And you could be the person who controls how one password can be maybe shared across other passwords, or excuse me, accounts. That kind of delegation at scale, delegating identity management out to the people who own the identities, is actually a really, really profound idea that's absolutely going to revolutionize IT. And that's the beginnings, really, of this whole movement towards self-managed IT. Very, very exciting. And the only way that it can come about, really, is through APIs. APIs are that important conduit between any organization, whether it's a federal group, whether it's an enterprise, or whether it's just your own computing within the boundaries of your own house. APIs are the piece that builds the boundary, but also allows structured data entry and control over who gets access to what. So next slide, please. Now, of course, if you're going to put all of your eggs in the API basket, you have to sort of look at why it's actually a hard thing to manage. Because in some ways, when you stop and think about it, in a sense, part of what I'm saying is we have a lot of the pieces we already need. So in other words, when you look at the basic concepts of APIs, they're built on a lot of the technology that we already distributed over the last 20 years or so for the World Wide Web. So aren't we done? Like, don't we have everything we need? Well, the answer is not quite, because the minute you start to change things a little bit, the minute you start to move the whole API concept from just browsing the web into real computer-to-computer or device-to-device sort of communications, things change enough that it really does help to sort of stop and look at what you've got and figure out what you need to modify. Now, the big problem that we have these days with API management security is that we've got to be able to get through layers and layers of firewalls. We've got a huge diversity of back-end systems and things like that. And we've also got this problem that we're beginning to build applications that use these technologies to, tie together applications. But at the same time, they begin to drift. They begin to, sort of change in scope and that. So what we need is a technology that really allows us to manage this effectively by kind of brokering between clients and servers and becoming not just the border guard that allows us to be able to get in and pass these layers of security in a very managed and secure way, of course, but also allows us to adapt between different systems. And this is exactly what Layer 7 works on. Next slide, please. Layer 7 has a gateway-based solution, which what we do is we place between the client and the server. And it really does act as that border guard. So it's there to protect the server. It's there to decide whether or not a client is actually allowed to get into access to the server or not. And that's a very powerful concept, because what it means is that it takes security and access control out of the hands of developers and puts it back into the hands of security administrators. And that actually is a win-win for everybody. Because to tell you the truth, the developers don't like doing security. Security's hard. It's fraught with all sorts of different perils. And if you screw it up, you're probably going to lose your job. So for a developer who really wants to focus on making a great application, if they can say, I can just focus on building the app and getting that right and making an app that really delights all of my users, and then I can delegate security out to a professional security expert who really knows how to do that stuff and who does it consistently for all of the different applications, within our group, regardless of whether they're, hosted on a .NET server or a Java server or a Ruby on Rails server or whatever. That's a very powerful thing, and that's a real win-win, because then you get both the focus of a security professional doing it right and doing it right everywhere, and then you allow the developer to focus 100% on just making great apps. And that's exactly what Layer 7 does. Our gateway solution sits in the middle there so that the developers can focus on building great apps and security administrators can focus on basically putting the rules and policies into that gateway that really take on the responsibility of protecting those applications. So next slide, please. The way it works really is that there's a policy language in these gateways that really takes on all of the capabilities of being able to manage anything in a transaction going through the network. That has to do with things like authentication and authorization, identifying who you are and what you're allowed to access. But it can also touch on things like confidentiality, which is really, really important for a lot of our data today. We can do threat detection to ensure that we're not under some kind of attack, and if we are, take the appropriate evasive action. We can also manage the access to real applications so that they're not overwhelmed with, legitimate traffic, and that we can manage that access so that we can, ensure that we're getting, the best possible service out to our users. And then finally, the other thing that it's really good for is transformation and adaptation between different systems. One of the problems in computing has always been essentially different languages. And even though we try our best as developers to be able to make applications talk and that, things really come up. And this is a game of details. And really the details can be pretty ugly a lot of the time. One of the things that Layer 7 does is that it allows you to, on the fly, translate data types, everything like that, from one form to another. And so if, let's say, a server suddenly changes, or a client sends in some data that's not quite right, it can actually be up-leveled or transformed, assuming it's from like an authorized sender, so they can be adapted. And that's a very, very powerful thing, because it means that you don't have to start opening up code and basically kicking off whole regression cycles of testing and validation and things to actually get your job done. You can actually make changes on the fly and adapt to the realities of everyday computing. It's a very, very powerful concept. So next slide. So where does it show up? Well, typically what we do is we take these gateways and we deploy them at the edge of the network. It's not the only deployment pattern. We have a number of others, but this one's easy for most people to kind of grasp because it makes sense. It's that sort of border guard model where all of the internal systems, those are the ones in the upper right there, are protected by that gateway. And that gateway becomes the point of publication of any APIs that might be used to integrate applications out in the cloud or mobile applications or partners or anything like that. The gateways themselves, of course, are highly resilient. We build appliances mainly at Layer 7, both hardware appliances, so quite literally a pizza box device that you can pick up and put into your network, or virtual appliances, which are basically the same concept but made into computer code that's very, very easy to run within a VMware environment. Virtual appliances are something that I get really excited about because I really think that's one of the future important pieces of IT. They're very pluggable. It takes you nothing to spin them up and get them going. If you need more, if you need to scale very quickly because of loads, you can spin up new virtual appliances. It's a very, very powerful concept in IT these days, and we're seeing it take off all over the place. But in either case, whether you go for virtual appliances or hardware appliances, you get exactly the same capabilities. We don't really differentiate, to tell you the truth, here at Layer 7 because the same code goes into both those pieces. So really the choice is yours depending on what makes the most sense for your environment. Now, an interesting thing that we get to with a scenario like this is if we're just producing, a border guard, if we're just sitting at the edge of the network and saying, we're going to make sure all the transactions coming into our network are validated and everything like that. We're going to check credentials. We're going to manage cryptography and all this kind of stuff. We're going to do audit. We're going to do key management. That's all well and good. But when you think about that, that's about blocking. That's about stopping, the bad guys from getting in, which is a very important thing, absolutely. But how can we make it easier to actually build new apps for the people who are supposed to be building new apps? Because as we know, security is only good security if it's also letting in the people who are supposed to get in, but also facilitating the delivery of applications. And that's been kind of one of the holy grails for a lot of years of computing. We haven't been very good at that in the past. But we have an answer here at Layer 7 as well, and it's on the next slide. This is what we call the API portal, and it sits right beside our gateways. And its job really is to manage the developers. Those are those guys down there in the kind of bottom middle who are building applications that integrate with remote systems. So those could be like an application on an Android device, or it could be an application that's, let's say, a mainframe that needs to talk to another mainframe, in another federal agency. Those people are really important because they're the ones that really are making use of the services that you're making available. And they can only do their job as well as the information that you get them. The API portal is about giving them all the information they need so that they can build applications quickly, safely, and securely. So it's the place where those developers go to register, to basically get the keys they need to, get access to services. They find out and learn about what services are available. And they then start to use test services. So in other words, they're not using the production systems; they're using sandboxes and test and validation services. So they can begin to build up their applications. And as the applications begin to get ready for movement out into production, that relationship can be managed so that the developers can actually have their applications moved into production safely and securely under control of the owners of the APIs themselves. So the neat thing about the API portal is it really is that one-stop shop for learning about the applications, learning about the APIs that are available, but then making use of those APIs and building apps. So it's really about accelerating application delivery. It's an important part of the whole puzzle, and a lot of our customers use it exactly so that they can get more applications out faster and more reliably. So next slide, please. Here's what it looks like. The API portal, of course, can be completely skinned to whatever your agency's colors and logos and things like that are. In this case, I've got 3 different examples, all from the commercial sector, that have basically taken exactly the same API portal and given it their own spin. So it looks very, very much like their regular website. One of them you'll see is actually Adobe, who uses this internally actually for their own developers and that. And not surprisingly, they have probably one of the best looking portals I've ever seen, but that's an important thing for Adobe. And so the portal itself can be basically your front door for developers. It gives you that place where you engage developers and you manage them through their whole life cycle. Because of course, anytime you're doing client-server computing, you have that delegation of responsibility. And it's only really as good as the ability to control all of those parties and give them the tools that they need, but also make sure they're doing the things right and doing the things that they should be doing. So with that, I think I'm the next slide. We'll talk a little about different people who've used this. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jim Rice.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate you making the time to provide this introductory overview. And as Scott talked about, we have been very fortunate that Layer 7 has been adopted in the public sector, but 2 other very strong sectors for us over the last decade has been the financial services and the telecom arenas, as well as you can see a collection of corporate logos that fall into various other categories. It's exciting to have customers like Adobe, Cisco, Best Buy, all pushing the envelope on embracing our technology as a gateway solution for external facing as well as internal integration projects and security projects. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking specifically about what the public sector has been how they've been utilizing the Layer 7 technologies. And with the advent of 9/11, we basically shifted as a nation from a need-to-know model to a need-to-share. And the needles in the haystack problem are getting significantly worse with more and more sensors and Internet of Things data generation technologies, finding the right information at the right time in the right place and making it available to others who need to know. This need to share issue is becoming more and more paramount. And as is illustrated in this cloud scenario, we have Agency 1 who has a system of record. In this case, we'll say it's a command and control system where data is being collected by a very specific platform, and the upload of that information has to be trusted by all the consumers of that system. And so there's a need to make sure that the data going in is from the sources that are expected, and that API is not abused. Likewise, when these different systems are out there pulling the data out in order to make their decisions and executing their mission, there's a lot of trust expected around the quality of that data. And so again, you want to make sure that, as Scott referred to earlier, authentication and authorization is key. Threat models and making sure that no bad things happen to these systems is important. So the cyber aspects. And then you have just the standard integration, interoperability challenges that face a lot of these system-of-system integration problems, or just the nature of sharing information in a trusted manner across systems of a single agency, or as is depicted here, a multi-agency collaboration. And so what we've listed there is a few of the customers who have been longtime users of Layer 7. For example, Army Accessions Command in Fort Knox. I'll talk about them towards the end of the presentation. The National Cyber Range, large Air Force system-of-system program called AOC Weapons System, the Air Force Space Community with the JSPOC mission system, GPS OCX Next Gen, the Integrated Electronic Health Record, which is a very publicly visible program which we've been trying for years to successfully move very sensitive DoD medical records over to the VA and back and forth in a real-time fashion. And so Layer 7 is fortunate to be a part of the SOA ESB of the Integrated Electronic Health Record Program. Then there's the recently in the news Affordable Care Act, healthcare.gov. Layer 7 is also on the back end of making sure that all the data that is collected is provided in a format that is acceptable to the downstream systems across a variety of agencies and commercial entities. State Department, Homeland Security, IRS, Patent Trademark Office, all, including FBI, all have very sensitive data that they want to make sure is secured and collected and shared in a manner that is appropriate for that data. A little bit of a niche space, more specific to the DoD and the intel community, is the need for what historically was known as SneakerNet. There are very specific purpose-built technologies out there called a cross-domain solution or cross-domain guard. And while Layer 7 is not accredited and certified as one of those guards, we have been working for the last 5-6 years to make sure that those solutions do their tasks better when it comes to real-time information sharing across a security network boundary such as unclass to class or secret to top secret. And so as is listed here, in case that's of interest to you in the community, we have a lot of history working with the cross-domain guard community and in order to embrace this real-time information sharing across that security network boundary. One of the things that we've seen over and over again is the need for this idea of how do we decouple security policies from being hard-coded in the applications, as Scott mentioned earlier, and provide a mechanism where policy enforcement can occur in a configured product like the Layer 7 Secure Span Gateway. And so this framework has been, that's depicted here, has been in place for many years with the terms like a policy enforcement point or PEP, a policy decision point or PDP, and attribute retrieval services to facilitate not only authentication and authorization entitlement decisions, but also role-based and attribute-based access controls. And so Layer 7 has been evolving its technology now for many years and can provide one or all of these components and connecting and integrating with a variety of other technologies that most enterprises have already been acquiring. As I mentioned earlier, the Integrated Electronic Health Record, here's a presentation slide from the IPO given frequently at their conferences, showing the vision of the different layers of the architecture for a user interface layer connecting to applications, that connects to the service broker layer, that connects to the data layer. And so Layer 7 is focused on that Tier 3 And in particular, as is shown on this slide, you can see that we are providing that gateway function to mediate the XML HL7 traffic from one region to a site or across regions, providing a FIPS compliant and DISA-STIG certified ready solution, supporting all the standard security protocols and standards that the government is looking at, such as SAML and XACTML. Another example here is the data services hub type architecture, where again Layer 7's gateway is depicted as taking in SOAP messages and perhaps also needing to modify them in order to turn them into JSON or REST-based messages in order to integrate with other systems that are deployed in various data centers across the civilian community for this project. And last slide here to talk about just some example case studies is the Army Accessions Command with GoArmy.com. Again, they were looking to enable the recruiting community being utilizing and leveraging existing legacy systems, integrating them in a way that was enable more agility. They actually documented in a case study a huge benefit for switching over from an old way of doing security to using the Layer 7 gateways, where they saw a change from 13 weeks per iteration for deployment of a new capability to down to 2 to 3 weeks per iteration. So that 10-week delta is time that they get back to put out more releases more often at a lower cost and with more consistency. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dave.
Jim, thank you very much. Scott, thank you much for your time. Layer 7 together, we appreciate you guys running through that deck and giving us a rundown of your technologies. Just a quick piece about 3Wire. If you are interested in acquiring or learning additional information about the technology, you can get to us a few different ways, either through the GSA schedule, through a SOUP contract, or courtesy of the CIO SP3 contract, or you can find further information going to 3wiresystems.com. Once again, thank you for your time and attention.